Well, with our nation's unemployment rate at a standstill, hovering at 8.2%, and only 80,000 jobs created last month, we're still in this funk right now.
We're talking about the economy with Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker sitting here with us. Is the economy headed in the right direction, as the president suggested this week? Good to see you, Governor.
Good to see you, Governor. Good to be here.
It is interesting. It clearly looked like the president went away from that line. He said earlier in the day, after the jobs numbers were released, that we're headed in the right direction, but didn't use that phrase again. Where are we headed in terms of this economy, and how will it impact the...
Well, remember, this was a president just a few weeks ago who said the private sector was doing just fine and then retracted that real quickly. I think when people realized it's not, we could be growing much quicker than this. Many states like ours are doing a little bit better because we made changes in the state leadership in the last couple of years. But we could be doing so much better, and it's really largely dependent on the federal government.
That's interesting, because you bring up the state issue, and where President Obama is doing well right now is in some of the swing states. He's got an 8-9 point lead right now over Mitt Romney in some of the polls. But what's interesting is that may not be reflected because of the Obama administration's policies. It may be policies like your own.
Well, good example. Wisconsin, a couple years before I was governor, when Barack Obama was the president, a Democrat was the governor. At that time, we lost more than 100,000 jobs. Our unemployment rate was over 9%. We've made some fundamental changes over the last year and a half, and we've gained more than 40,000 new jobs. Our unemployment below 7%, but it's not because of the federal government. In fact, oftentimes I'll hear employers say to me, good example, a manufacturer of aluminum in Manitowoc recently told me he loved what our state agencies were doing. What trapped him up was the federal EPA blocking him from creating more jobs.
Well, speaking of manufacturing, let's listen to what the president has said about the state of manufacturing in the country, and then we'll talk about Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Manufacturing is starting to come back here in Ohio and all across the country. Some of the biggest manufacturing job growth since the 1990s. A lot of folks lost their jobs, but a lot of folks have retrained, and now they're going back and getting jobs in renewable energy and industries of the future. But for all the progress we've made, we've still got a long way to go.
Manufacturing starting to come back across the country. How's it doing in Wisconsin?
We see manufacturing doing a little bit better, but again, it's one of those where you look at exports, look at Europe in particular, we could be doing much better than that. Midwestern states, Wisconsin, he was just talking about Ohio, Pennsylvania, and the Big Ten, other states throughout the Midwest could be doing much, much better, but we need a good foreign trade policy. We haven't had any of that kind of leadership from the president. Those are things that would help us with more manufacturing across the country.
There was one report this week that suggested manufacturing actually contracted for the first time since July of 2009. Didn't get a whole lot of play. But I want to ask you about the overall narrative of what we're talking about. An author earlier on this program said that the federal government does not create jobs. He's highlighting the American spirit. Well, then, so does the federal government get blame when the economy struggles, and then the governors get credit when states create jobs?
No, I said it's one of those where my belief is government at any level, state as well as the federal level, the government doesn't create jobs, people do. The difference, though, is the government can either create a barrier or an opportunity to create those jobs. What we've done in states like Wisconsin, like Ohio, like Pennsylvania, where you elected new Republican governors in the last 2 years, was create better opportunities at the state level, but we're still not seeing it at the federal level. We've got one of the highest corporate tax rates. We still have an unbelievably high overall individual tax rate, combined with regulations from the Department of Labor, EPA, other federal agencies. Really, they're not about creating jobs, but they are about creating barriers to jobs, and that's something that's got to change.
I want to ask you about Mitt Romney, though, in your state, because I think this is really fascinating. Yeah. And we're hearing that Mitt Romney's not doing enough to get the message out. The Wall Street Journal pages this week sort of attacked him for just bashing the president, but not really talking about true policies to get us through these these hurdles. And specifically in these swing states, he's suffering right now behind President Obama with an 8-9% approval rating, as I mentioned. So what does Mitt Romney need to say to the people of Wisconsin to win this election?
He was with Paul Ryan and I 2 weeks ago in Janesville, which is a typical blue-collar city. It's a city that a few years ago lost the GM plant. The bailout by the president didn't do anything to help the people in Janesville. There still isn't a plant there. The message he said there is one I hope he repeats over and over and over again when he comes to Wisconsin. He talked about not just the problems the president has. He talked about repealing Obamacare, giving certainty back to small business owners. He talked about cost-effective and reliable sources of power. He talked about streamlining the regulatory process so what we do enforce is about common sense, not about government red tape. He talked about lowering the tax burden so more money went back in the hands of Wisconsin and American consumers and entrepreneurs. Those are the things I want to hear him say over and over again. You heard it a little bit just just the other day in New Hampshire when he took a break from his vacation. But in our case in Wisconsin, I think other swing states, we need repetition. We need clarity and consistency in that message. It can't be just about attacking the other side, although there's plenty of attack. It's got to be about saying, here's the message I have to turn America around.
Should he have been there when your recall election was going on? A lot of heat on President Obama for not being there, but Mitt Romney wasn't there much either.
Actually, during the primary, when he was in campaigning and Rick Santorum was still in the race at that point, he was consistently there. In fact, he was one of the earliest people that called me. In our case...
The days right ahead of it, he was not.
Well, but in our case, we said this is really about us. Okay. So we didn't ask him to come in. He had been in earlier. He had made his case. He said it very publicly. He said it was the most important race probably in the country at that time. So he was clearly there, unlike the president, who was in Minnesota and Illinois days before the election.
He flew over Madison.
He literally flew over. Maybe he waved as he went over or something like that.
Governor, I don't know if you heard our last segment where we were talking about something President Obama said on the campaign trail, where he was trying to appeal to middle-class voters and to his middle-class crowd. And he said, this is where the real values are. You represent the values of America. What do you hear in that statement?
You know, that's remarkable. To me, values are about America. They're not about the middle class. They're not about being poor or rich or anywhere in between. Heck, I grew up, I was listening to the earlier segment, too, about talking about faith. My dad was a minister. We didn't know at the time we were poor because we just lived the attitude that Americans do, which is you work hard, you respect others, you strive for success no matter what it might be. And I thought the priest on earlier was exactly right. Success may be in part monetary, but it may be having a good life, having a good attitude, having a good community. Those are shared American values. And for the president to go on and try and distinguish between so-called income levels, I think is actually quite the most American. We have shared values as Americans. Those are things we cling to, and I think those are things we should be striving for.
We heard, obviously, the effects and some of the fallout from the Obamacare ruling from the Supreme Court among some Republican governors this past week, which is that they are not in the mode to take part in this new expanded Medicaid and Medicare program, and they are going to stay and opt out of this. What do you think the broader implications will be for Obamacare as it takes its teeth into effect, not even now, 2014, 2013, 2014, in the state of Wisconsin?
Well, you're right, first off, because a lot of people, you got it right, but a lot of people assume that governors who are concerned about Obamacare are somehow violating the law. The law doesn't go into effect until January of 2014, so a year and a half from now. But between now and then, I think many of us, and I think even after the election, many Democrats who are quiet, there'll be some Democrat governors who raise the same concerns. We're very concerned about the long-term impact of pushing off higher cost of Medicaid onto the states, which I believe this will ultimately do. I believe they're looking for a fall guy in this, and it'll be state governments. The other thing that's amazing, you go back to the questions you had about jobs. I mean, the Supreme Court said clearly, this is a tax increase. This is what many of us have said for years. This is a massive tax increase on the American people. And I think most people listening right now, most people across America think the last thing we need right now is a massive tax increase. I think that would have a devastating impact on the economy in this country, and that's something we don't need.
Will you implement the changes required of Obamacare ahead of the election, or will you?
No, we're waiting. We said, I've said for a year and a half, I said the first step is legal, second step is political. My hope is we get a new president, a new U.S. Senate, and we hold the House majorities with people who are committed to repealing Obamacare. If you don't like Obamacare, you got to get rid of President Obama. It's that simple.
Now that you won in the recall fight, how is it governing now? Is it hard to bring everybody back together after all the strife in your state?
No, in our case, the interesting thing is our legislature is not in session until January. So a lot of what we're going to be doing throughout the summer is working on issues, have the time to spend month after month really working on things that'll put more people in the work, that'll bring people together. You know, in the end, whether it's in our state capitals, it's in our nation's capital, when we talk about economic issues, those are things that should be able to bring people together. Politically, there's an instinct to grow apart, but I think people can come together, and that's what we're committed to doing.
Governor Scott Walker from Wisconsin is going to be here speaking in Manhattan tomorrow, then heading down to my fair city of Philadelphia. We hope they treat you well and get a good cheesesteak down there, Governor.
An authentic one, it sounds like.
Yes, I heard you counseling the governor on cheesesteak.
Although I got to, you know, you talk about no sports, though. I got to rip. There's a guy over here with a Giant shirt on after they took the Packers out. Although the year before, the Packers got to the playoffs to win the Super Bowl because the Giants lost. So maybe it's fair play one year after another.
We're looking for cheeseheads, but Clayton just added a couple of pieces of cheese, which didn't actually foot the bill. But
Philly cheesesteak, it's like a cheesesteak.
Aaron Rodgers voted the #1 player by the players in the NFL. So congratulations to your quarterback.
And well worth it. He's a good guy.
Thanks,
Great to see you, Governor.
Thanks, Governor. Thanks for being here.